Take two. Hello and welcome. It is 10 o'clock. It is the 12th day of July 2021. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM. The weather is disgusting and muggy. My cat is very sick. I'm very sick. What else is new? How are you? So I guess the topic du jour of the weekend was old school gaming. Blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm not sure what it is people mean when they say old school gaming. I assume it means different things to different people. And, of course, when you talk about old school gaming, you can't talk about old school gaming without talking about the OSR and all the retro clones of old school games. For example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 copies of Swords and Wizardry. All of them basically the same. Each one written by a different individual, but basically all the exact same game, more or less, which are retro clones of previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Why do we need 5,000 retro clones? Well, I guess, again, I can understand the desire to have legacy titles in print. You can't get the original D&D anymore for under $100. So it's nice to have 1 or 2 floating around so people can see how the game is evolved and changed, and keeping those legacy titles in print and being able to let people know what the old school was like. On the other hand, why do I need 40 copies of the exact same rules, which really is a rule set that kind of sucked? I mean, at least from my personal opinion, D&D didn't really become playable till 2nd edition and 3rd edition. But that's just me. You might think it was better other editions. So ignore me. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyways, the whole point is that there was a lot of talk about old school gaming over the weekend. And a lot of it was addressing things like Matthew Finch's premiere to old school gaming. Though the premiere to old school gaming really isn't a history of old school gaming. It's more like addressing sort of the way games were played Wizards of the Coast, 3rd edition. See, I don't know, because I don't know what old school means. Is old school every edition previously to 5th? Is old school just the Gygax TSR games? What about 3rd? Because 3rd is sort of that weird cross between the end of TSR and the beginning of Wizards of the Coast. Does 3rd count as old school? There are retro clones of 4th. There are retro clones of Cyberpunk. There are retro clones out of games that only came out a couple years ago. Are those considered old school? Is every game other than 5th edition old school D&D? What does old school mean? Because for some, old school seems to mean grim, dark, we're going to die every 5 seconds role-playing. And to others, old school seems to mean wacky, gonzo, clowns on dinosaurs with hundreds and hundreds of random tables style of gaming. And to other people, old school gaming means, maximize characters, straight 18s, taking advantage of every optimization rule available to you to play, totally overpowered characters while we're still within the rules. Of course, segue, that's something that we couldn't do till the power options started to become available to us, which was around, late 3rd. I mean, sure, as early as day 1, I could just make a character, have straight 18s, and we could play Monty Hall, where, a single goblin is guarding 60,000 gold pieces and a +1 sword. But does that what old school means, or does old school mean the idea of less than optimal characters who are rolling 3d6 for their stats and are usually nothing more than an idiot with a stick who are going out and adventuring and hoping to survive past the end of the first day? So the trouble with talking about old school gaming is there's no one definition for what the old school is. My definition is going to be different than your definition. It's going to be different than your definition. None of us played any edition the same way. None of us played every other game. None of us played the same game the same way. So if you got a whole room of people all running Dungeons and Dragons or Villains and Vigilantes or Champions or Boot Hills or Space Marines or Crickets and Crawdads or any other game you can think of, 20 DMs running 20 systems, the exact same system, are going to run it 20 different ways, and they could all say, I'm running it old school. But if you boil it down to what is the best way to define old school, is that 0, 1st, and 2nd edition didn't give you much in the way of problem-solving skills. The idea of, like, I have 3 ranks in blacksmithing, I've got a hide skill of plus 14. That idea didn't really show up till 3rd. I mean, there were ways to add packages and skills to your characters towards the end of 2nd with all the splat books, but really 0 edition, BX, red box, blue box, 2nd edition, early 2nd edition until the splat book started coming out. You know, Steve the Fighter was basically a lot of hit points, a lot of armor, and, you know, we didn't know what Steve the Fighter could or could not do other than hitting things with a sword. Steve the Magic User, what can I do besides casting spells? What do I actually know about magic? Because there's no skill, that defines that. There's nothing like history. Sure, the thief had pick locks and climby and stuff like that, but, what about, does anybody know how to skin a deer? So with the introduction of skills and the introduction of being able to, have a skill at plus 17, thank you, Pathfinder, the problem solving sort of changed. And I think that's basically one of the main definitions of the old school was rulings, not rules. If in an old school situation, a DM says, okay, you see a room over here, there's a painting hanging on the wall. Over here, there's a shelf with some things on it. Over here, there's what looks like a door, and the floor is dusty. What do you do? Now, if I didn't have skills, like detect whatever and whatever, I might be more cautious. I might be more curious. I might ask more questions. It might be more character orientated. I might be more like, hey, does my character know anything about paintings? I might say things like, I might be more actively like, okay, I search for traps. I check the floor footprints. I walk carefully over the painting. What does the painting dictate? And since there's no rules for that in the early editions, we sort of based it on just rulings, what the DM would think, like, a case or case basis. There's no rule per se for checking out the painting. So the DM might say, okay, roll a D20. And if you roll a 14, roll a 12 or higher, with your intelligence modifier added, something about paintings. And then the guy would roll and he goes, I roll a 16 with my, and it's like, okay, you can, you describe the painting, brush strokes, blah, 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 gilded frame. You can then roll to estimate how much it's worth. Oh, is this a forgery or is this an original Steve? Because I know an original Steve is worth a lot of money, but a forgery might not be worth any money, but it could still probably sell. And again, because there was no rule for that, you would just sort of had to ad-lib what the DM would just give you answers to as opposed to rolling for. And then, when the system switched over to 3rd plus, with the addition of skills and with the addition of, outrageously high skills being able to be achieved relatively easy, especially in Pathfinder and in 5th edition, you might hear sentences more like, you walk into a room, you see a painting on that wall, you see a shelf with some things over there, you see an outline of a door over there, and you see some dust on the floor. And instead of describing and giving stories and trying to figure out, does my character know anything about what's on the shelf, you're more likely to hear, at least I guess that's the assumption, all right, I have a spot hidden of plus 12. I've got a spot traps of plus 13. I've got a perception of plus 8. I walk into the room. I roll 24 for my spot traps. I roll a 17 for my spot hidden, and I roll a 16 for my detect traps. What do I see? What do you tell me? Okay, the painting. I rolled a 14 for evaluate. How much is it worth? Tell me about it. A lot less do I know this. A lot less asking questions. A lot less would my character know anything about a painting, and a lot more just rolls. And yes, that is true. That and with the addition of skills and the addition of outrageously high skills has sort of whittled down situations where a player might be more willing to ask questions and interact in the world, as opposed to just roll a dice and let the DM tell them what they see or don't see, and then just get upset if they didn't notice that there was a trap on the floor. So is that what the old school means? Maybe. I mean, that's not to say there aren't people playing today who do the exact same thing. Go in and just want to really understand the room. And there's not to say that there weren't people in the old days who didn't give a fuck and just walked in, said, bam, I detect for traps. There's no traps. I take the painting. How much is it worth? I take the shit on the shelf. How much is it worth? Let's go. So that is not a clear defined definition, because there was many people kicking down the door, killing the monster and taking its stuff back in day one as there is today, and vice versa. There was as many people asking questions and interacting with the room today as there were back then. So that's not really a good definition of what old school role playing is, because again, everybody does it differently. You can't really put it in one package. So the second way to maybe define old school role playing is old school role playing was very more open-ended, had lots of paths, while the current style of role playing is much more linear. And that could be true. If you look at like old maps and the Jaquais school of design, you would see like a dungeon might have multiple entrances, multiple side passages, multiple secret doors, multiple areas that are left blank for the DM to fill. A lot of the early dungeons just had, just empty rooms, and just would say, DM, put whatever you want in here. You would look at old maps of like Caverns of Theseus or Skull Mountain or Keep on the Borderlands, and you see multiple entrances, multiple exits, multiple ways to tell the story. And you look at more of the current crop of stuff, and it does seem more linear. A lot less ideas of there's multiple choices and multiple ways to deal. But again, that's sort of ephemeral, because for every linear module and linear adventure out there today, there is as many open-ended. In fact, there's a lot of individuals who want it to be more open-ended and more interactive and more role-playing and character-driven, and don't want to just be linear. And back then, for every open-ended Jaquais dungeon, there were also a lot of very linear dungeons. I mean, White Plume Mountain is a pretty linear dungeon. Tomb of Horrors is sort of linear. There's only so many things you can do. Elemental Evil is pretty much linear. So, again, what does old school mean? What did we do in the 70s and 80s and early 90s that is so different than the way people play today? Because if you're just saying Critical Role, that's only one example. And as much as I bag on Critical Role and the people who want to game like Critical Role, I am sure there are hundreds of people all across the world who are playing completely different. So, again, it comes back to, I could fill a room with 20 DMs running the exact same adventure, and they would all run it completely different, and they could all say, I'm running this old school, because at the end, old school doesn't mean anything. There's nothing that we did in the 70s or 80s or 90s that's exceptionally special, that can't be done today and isn't being done today. This idea of asking questions and interactiveness and DMs being much more willing to just run with it and those are things that exist today. I mean, how many arguments do you hear online about people saying, I want more character interaction, I want more say in the world, I want less linear stories, I want to be able to explore and do and deal, and for every one of those, there's somebody who's saying, fuck it, I just want to see how well I can build my 5th edition character, and let's just go in and kill shit. I'm going to murder hobos and villagers. Fuck this diplomacy stuff, I'm going to attack the motherfucker. that's the same today as it was in day one. There's nothing I did in the old school that you can't do today, and that I'm sure people are doing today. So maybe this makes me an outsider, but I don't really understand this obsession with the old way of playing, because the old games weren't that great and the old system wasn't that great. I mean, even D&D first, D&D 0 are disasters. I mean, everybody refers to it as Gygax is God and Gygax is a great game. It's like, no, it's not a great game. I'm sorry. It's a mediocre game. It's still a mediocre game. Compared to the hundreds of other titles out there that do the exact same thing, it's better. And if you want to retro clone an old game, retro clone it first and foremost because it's something that I can't get anymore. And second, and you want to make that available, like Tinker's Dam or Crusaders or one of the hundred of other games that are legacy titles that you can't get anymore. Retro clone that. And then if you really want to retro clone 0, 1st, 2nd, 3rd edition D&D, knowing full well that there already are hundreds of others retro clones, then do something different with it like these guys did with Dungeon Crawl Classics. They took a retro clone of the original rules, and then they just went, what is the craziest shit we can come up with? What is the most gonzo, over-the-top, machine gun wielding, clowns riding dinosaurs, chaos magic-y, late 1980s schlock fantasy we can do? Because, I'm sorry if this upsets anybody, but I do not need 4 editions of the exact same rule set. There is nothing that great about the exact same rule set. And I'm sorry if I piss you off, but there's nothing I did in the old school, again, that you can't do now. So I don't know why you hold the old school up to such a high standard, because we made the same mistakes that people are making today. We were just as horrible then as we are now. We had good times, we had bad times. In the end, it wasn't about the game, it was about the people. And that's what it should be about, guys. If you want to have, as the hobby continues to splinter, if you really want to re-embrace the old school, then it should be about the people and the fun of playing the game. This silly, stupid, ridiculous, amazing, awesome, life-changing game that is role-playing, that is Dungeons & Dragons. That's what the old school should be about. Just having tables of a bunch of people sitting around for 3, 4, 5 hours, being crazy and saying, coming up with outrageous solutions to problems. Can I throw a blanket over it? That's what the old school is about, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. And I could be a complete and utter idiot who has no idea what he's talking about. And you're welcome to disagree with me. I'm going to post a link to this quick premiere of Old School Gaming by Mr. Matthew Finch. It is free on the line. It's only a couple pages, and it does sort of define some of the things that I talked about. Non-linear dungeons, rulings, not rules, blah, 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 blah. And I do understand some of the issues that people say they have, with the plus 23 versus just, do I know what the painting's about? But again, it's individual to individual. My old school is going to be completely different than what you think old school is going to be. And it's completely different than what you school is going to be. And obviously it's completely different than what this guy over here thinks old school is going to be. So I don't know. Just let it go. Go outside, have an ice cream, enjoy the weird weather. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I will talk to you later. Till then, stay warm, stay dry, stay safe, stay sane. Stay hydrated, stay out of the heat, stay off my land, and talk to you later, you old school, wonderful, awesome idiots that you are.